Single billionaire dad waits for his flight at the airport. When he hears a little homeless girl asking for food in 7 different languages, what he does next is unbelievable. Blake Elias Ford adjusted his watch and checked his flight time once more. Terminal 3, Gate B12. There were still 40 minutes left. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket for his wallet and pulled out a small photograph, its edges worn from being handled so often. Emma, 5 years old, missing her front teeth, with eyes far too bright for her age. He ran his thumb over the image, feeling the texture of the photo paper. The last time he saw her had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks that felt more like 3 months. The visitation agreement was clear. 1 weekend a month, alternating holidays. Cold numbers on paper that didn't convey the pain of being a long-distance father. He put the photo away and walked to the nearest coffee shop. The airport was buzzing with the typical Thursday afternoon rush. Harried executives, families hauling suitcases, lost tourists squinting at maps. Blake ordered a black coffee and chose a corner table, away from the commotion. He took out his phone to check emails, but the screen reflected his own tired face, 42 years old, hair just beginning to gray at the temples. When did he get so old? Emma was born when he was 37. It felt like yesterday. The divorce happened 2 years later, not for lack of love, but for too much work. Sarah always said he married the company, not her. Maybe she was right. Now he paid the price, watching his daughter grow up through brief calls and pictures on his phone. Blake raised his coffee cup to his lips when a small voice cut through his thoughts. "Excusez-moi, monsieur, avez-vous de la nourriture?" He looked up. A skinny girl, around 6 years old, stood beside his table, barefoot, wearing clean but very worn clothes, brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail. "Sorry, I don't speak French," Blake replied in English. The girl switched languages without missing a beat. "Do you have food, sir?" Blake blinked, surprised. "You speak English? Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Habla Español? Do you speak Portuguese?" The girl tested other languages, each word carefully pronounced. "Говорите ли вы по-русски? Рибенью во ханашимаска?" 7 languages. Blake counted mentally. A 6-year-old speaking 7 different languages, asking for food with bare feet in an airport. "English is fine," he said, still processing what he had just witnessed. "How do you know so many languages?" "My mom taught me. She says words open doors." The girl glanced at his table. "Do you have any food, even a little?" Blake looked around. The coffee shop sold sandwiches, cakes, fruit. He had enough money to buy the entire place, and here was a child asking for crumbs. "Of course. How about a sandwich?" The girl's eyes lit up. "Really? Really? What's your name?" "Aurora." Aurora. A lovely name for a girl who looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her small shoulders. Blake got up and walked to the counter. He ordered 2 sandwiches, hand a juice and an apple and a chocolate muffin. When he returned to the table, Aurora was seated, legs swinging without reaching the floor. "Thank you," she said, as Blake placed the food in front of her. She didn't dive into the food like he expected. Instead, she separated half of the sandwich. "I'll save this for my mom." Blake felt a tightness in his chest. "Where is your mom?" "Looking for a job. I came here to see if someone would give me food." Aurora bit into the sandwich slowly, as if trying to make it last. "Do you have kids?" The question caught him off guard. Blake touched the pocket where he kept Emma's photo. "Yes, a little girl about your age. She also loves to learn." "Does she live with you?" "No, she lives with her mom, in another city." Aurora nodded like she understood grown-up complications perfectly. "She must miss you." Blake swallowed hard. "I miss her too. Why don't you live together?" How could he explain divorce, shared custody, and the messes of adult life to a 6-year-old begging for food in an airport? "Sometimes things get complicated between adults," Blake said. "But that doesn't mean I love my daughter any less." Aurora took a sip of juice. "My mom says that love has no size or distance. It either exists or it doesn't." The simplicity of her words hit Blake like a punch to the gut. A 6-year-old had just summed up in 2 sentences what he couldn't explain to himself in 2 years of therapy. "Your mom is wise." She is. She knows a lot. We used to have a big house with lots of books. She taught me different languages every day. Aurora paused. We don't have the house anymore, but she still teaches me new words. Blake watched the girl eat. She had the same curious gleam in her eyes as Emma, the same way of tilting her head when asking questions, the same precocious intelligence that made him proud and worried at the same time. But Emma had a warm home, a private school, new clothes, and shoes that fit. Aurora had 7 languages and bare feet. The contrast was brutal. "What's your name?" Aurora asked. "Blake." "Blake," she repeated, testing the sound. "It's a strong name, like a rock." He smiled for the first time in weeks. "And Aurora is a beautiful name, like the sunrise. My mom picked it because I was born really early and when the sky was still pink." Aurora finished eating and carefully folded the sandwich wrapper, storing the other half. "Thank you, Blake. You're kind." A loudspeaker announced boarding for Blake's flight. He looked at the gate, then at Aurora. "I have to go." "They're calling my flight." "Are you going to see your daughter?" "Yes, I am," Aurora smiled. The same bright smile Emma gave when she was happy about something simple. "Give her a hug from me. Tell her it's from a friend who also loves to learn." Blake stood up, took out his wallet and pulled out some bills. "For your mom," he said, placing the money on the table. Aurora looked at the money, then at him. "Mom says we shouldn't accept handouts." "It's not a handout. It's a gift from someone who has a daughter a lot like you." She picked up the money and put it in her jeans pocket. "Thank you. I'll tell Mom you're a good person." Blake walked toward his gate, but turned back once more. Aurora stood there in the same spot, waving her small hand. He boarded the plane with a knot in his throat. During the 3-hour flight, Blake tried reading reports, answering emails, organizing the agenda for the following week. But his mind kept wandering back to Aurora, her bare feet, the 7 languages, her smile that resembled Emma's. She has the same curious eyes, he thought, but she's all alone. When the plane landed, Blake called Sarah to let her know he'd arrived. Emma picked up the phone. "Daddy, did you bring me something?" "I did, Princess. I'll see you soon." But while he spoke to his daughter, Blake couldn't stop thinking about Aurora. A brilliant child who should be in a classroom, not at an airport begging for food. The flight had taken off, but Aurora remained with him. Sarah was waiting at the airport, Emma running alongside her as soon as she saw Blake exit the arrivals area. "Daddy!" Emma leapt into his arms. Blake lifted her off the ground, feeling the familiar weight of his daughter. 5 years old, but already talking like a little grown-up. "Hi, Princess, I missed you." "I missed you too. Look, I lost another tooth." Emma flashed a gap-toothed grin, pointing to the empty space in front. "Really? Did the tooth fairy visit?" "Yep. She left $5 under my pillow." Blake looked at Sarah, who shrugged with a smile. "Inflation," she said. In the car, Emma wouldn't stop talking. She told him about school, her new teacher, the neighbor's cat that climbed a tree and had to be rescued by firefighters. Blake listened to it all, but his mind kept drifting to Aurora. The 2 girls were almost the same age, the same curiosity, but Emma talked about cats and fairies, while Aurora talked about not having a home. "Daddy, are you listening to me?" "Of course, Princess. You were talking about the cat." "No, Daddy. I was asking if you're going to take me to the park tomorrow." "I am. What if we get ice cream too?" Emma clapped her hands. "Can I pick 2 flavors?" "You can pick as many as you want." Blake hugged his daughter tightly. She smelled of strawberry shampoo and had light pink nail polish. Clean clothes, new shoes, a backpack full of colorful books. Everything a child should have, everything Aurora did not. "Daddy, are you staying the whole weekend?" "Yes, Princess. Saturday and Sunday are all ours." "Can I pick what we do?" "You can pick everything." Emma clapped again. "I want to go to the zoo, have ice cream, watch a movie, and make pancakes on Sunday." "All that? All of it? You promised I could choose?" Blake laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had in weeks. Emma had a gift for making everything seem simple. Emma snuggled into the car seat and closed her eyes. Blake watched her sleep for the rest of the drive. Her hair neatly cut, rosy cheeks, the peaceful breathing of someone who always slept in a warm bed. When they arrived at Sarah's house, Blake carried Emma in his arms to her room. She woke for a second as he laid her in bed. "Daddy?" "Yes, princess." "Are we making pancakes tomorrow morning?" "We'll make the best pancakes in the world." "With chocolate?" "With chocolate and strawberries." Emma smiled with her eyes closed. "I'm glad you came." She drifted back to sleep. Blake kissed her forehead and quietly left the room. Sarah was in the kitchen making tea. "You seem different," she said without turning around. "How so?" "I don't know, more pensive than usual." Blake sat at the table. "I met a girl at the airport, about Emma's age. And she was begging for food, barefoot, alone." Sarah turned to face him. "Did you help?" "I bought her a sandwich, gave her some money." "And now you feel guilty for having a privileged child?" Blake sighed. Sarah was always direct. It was one of the things he admired and found irritating in equal measure. "Maybe." "Blake, you can't save all the children in the world." "I know, but you can be a good father to Emma." He nodded. Sarah was right. She usually was. But as he went upstairs to the guest room, Blake couldn't stop thinking about Aurora. Blake left Emma on Monday morning with a heavy heart. The weekend had passed too quickly. Pancakes on Saturday, the zoo in the afternoon, a movie at night. On Sunday, more pancakes, a park visit, and a drawing session that lasted hours. Emma drew princesses. He tried drawing cars that looked like boxes on wheels. "You're bad at drawing, Daddy," Emma laughed, "but I like your boxy cars." Now, 3 days later, Blake was back at his office, trying to focus on quarterly reports. But the numbers on the screen blurred with memories of Aurora, the barefoot girl who spoke 7 languages. The cruel contrast between her and Emma wouldn't leave his mind. On Wednesday afternoon, Blake closed his laptop and grabbed his car keys. He told his secretary he'd be back later. He didn't explain where he was going. He wasn't entirely sure himself. The airport was busy as always. Blake bought a coffee and headed to the same cafe where he'd met Aurora. He didn't really expect to find her there. What child would spend her entire life in an airport? But there she was, sitting in the same corner, watching people walk by, still barefoot, still thin. But when she saw him, her eyes lit up. "Blake!" She ran to him. Blake felt a tightening in his chest. When was the last time someone was so happy just to see him? "Hi, Aurora. How are you?" "I'm okay. Mom still can't find a job. Yesterday we only had old bread the baker was going to throw away." The casual way she talked about her own hunger left Blake speechless. Emma complained if dinner was 15 minutes late. "Do you want something to eat?" "Yes, please." They headed to the cafe. Blake ordered 2 sandwiches, juice, fruit, and a piece of cake. Aurora waited for him to sit before she started to eat. "You came back," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I did." "Why?" Blake paused. Why indeed? To feel less guilty, to prove something to himself, or simply because he couldn't stop thinking about her? "I wanted to see how you were," Aurora smiled. "Mom says kind people are rare, that when we find one, we should take good care of them. Your mom is wise." "She is." Aurora took a slow bite of her sandwich. "Want me to tell you a story?" "Sure." Aurora wiped her hands on a napkin and settled into the chair. "We used to have a big house. Really big. With stairs that made noise when you walked up. It was funny, like music. Mom said it was like a giant piano." Blake listened, picturing a little Aurora climbing musical stairs. "We had a real piano, too, black and shiny. Mom played classical music every morning while we had breakfast. I knew all the songs by heart." "Do you know how to play piano?" "I used to. Mom taught me. But now," Aurora shrugged, "we don't have a piano anymore." "What about the books?" Aurora's eyes lit up. "Oh, the books. We had an entire library. Books in French, German, Italian, Russian. Mom read to me in different languages. She said each language sees the world differently. That's why you speak so many languages." "Yes. Mom always said that words are doors. The more languages you know, the more doors you can open." Aurora paused. But all the doors closed when we lost our house. What happened? I'm not sure. Mum doesn't like to talk about it. One day we had everything, the next day we had nothing. We had to leave the house fast. We only took some clothes. Aurora took a sip of juice. But you know what I miss the most? What? The books and the piano and studying. I used to study a lot. Math, science, history. But what I loved most were the languages. I like learning the sounds of words, how they dance in your mouth when you speak. Blake smiled. My daughter's like that too. She's curious about everything. Always asking questions, always wanting to learn more. What's she like? Smart. Funny. She draws princesses and says my cars look like boxes. Aurora laughed. She must be cool. She is. You two are alike, always hungry for knowledge. Does she live with you? No, she lives with her mom. Do you miss her? A lot. Aurora nodded. I understand. Sometimes missing someone hurts more than being hungry. The sentence hit Blake like lightning. A 6-year-old had just perfectly described how he felt. The emptiness of not having Emma close hurt more than anything physical. It's true, he said. Missing someone really hurts. Aurora finished her sandwich and looked at Blake seriously. You're a good person. I can feel it. How do you know? By your eyes. Mom taught me to look at people's eyes. She says eyes don't lie. Yours are sad, but they're kind. Blake felt something strange happen inside his chest, like a tight knot slowly coming undone. Talking to Aurora was different. She didn't judge, didn't ask for anything beyond a sandwich and an honest conversation. Something inside him was healing. Aurora, he said slowly, do you think your mom would let me visit you? Maybe I can help. Aurora stopped eating and studied him carefully. Help how? I'm not sure yet. But a smart girl like you should be in school, not begging for food in airports. Mom has pride. She doesn't like accepting help. How about you? What do you think? Aurora was silent for a long time. Blake could see thoughts flickering in her eyes. I think yes, she finally said. I think Mom would let you. If I'm there with you. You'd be there. Sure. You're my friend now. Blake smiled. When was the last time someone called him a friend without expecting anything in return? Then let's go. Aurora finished her juice and stood up. We live pretty far from here. It's a small apartment. That's okay. They walked to the parking lot. Aurora stopped beside Blake's car. Is this yours? Yes. It's nice. Black, like the piano we used to have. Blake opened the door for her. Aurora climbed in carefully, touching the leather seat with reverence. I've never been in a car this nice. Sit wherever you like. During the drive, Aurora gave directions. They left the upscale part of the city and entered a simpler neighborhood. Smaller houses, narrower streets. Following Aurora's instructions, they arrived at an old red brick building. This is it, Aurora said. Apartment B. They climbed 2 flights of stairs. Aurora knocked on the door with a specific pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 slow taps. That's so Mum knows it's me, she explained. The door opened, and Blake saw a woman around 35, brown hair in a simple bun, tired but alert eyes, clean clothes but worn. There was a quiet elegance about her, as though she was once used to better things. Aurora, you're late, the woman said, then noticed Blake. Who is he? Mum, this is Blake, the kind man I told you about. He gave me food. The woman eyed Blake carefully. He could sense her silent assessment. A man in an expensive suit, wearing a pricey watch, driving a fancy car. What did he want with them? Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Estelle, she replied without offering her hand. Please come in. The apartment was tiny. One room that was also the kitchen, an old but clean sofa, a small table with 2 chairs. Blake noticed a half-open door revealing a single bed. Where did they both sleep? Sit down, Estelle said, motioning to the sofa. Blake sat. Aurora ran over to her mum and whispered something in her ear. Estelle listened, glancing at Blake occasionally. Aurora says you've been kind to her, Estelle said finally. She's a special girl. She is indeed. Estelle sat at the other end of the sofa. What do you want, Mr. Blake? Blake Ford, and I don't want anything. I just wanted to meet you. Aurora speaks a lot about her mother. She shouldn't be at the airport, Estelle sighed, but options are limited. Aurora settled on the floor between them. Mom, Blake wants to help us. Estelle stiffened. We don't need charity. It's not charity, Blake said quickly. It's recognition. Aurora is extraordinarily smart. She should be studying. I know what my daughter should be doing. Estelle's voice had a carefully contained irritation. But life doesn't always give us choices. Blake glanced around the apartment. No books, no piano, nothing reminiscent of the life Aurora described. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to offend. Estelle watched him for a long moment. Then her expression softened slightly. Aurora smiles when she comes back from talking with you, she said quietly. And that's rare. It's been a while since I've seen her really smile. Blake felt that strange sensation in his chest again, as though something broken was being mended. She makes me smile too, he said. It's been a long time since I've spoken with someone so honest. Aurora looked from her mom to Blake, as if sensing some shift in the air. Mom, she said gently, he's good. I'm sure of it. Estelle ran her hand over her daughter's hair. I know, sweetie, I know. Blake returned on Friday with 2 bags full of items. Children's math books, colorful notebooks, colored pencils, fresh fruit, and an illustrated English dictionary. He also brought a few French books he'd found at a specialty store. Aurora opened the door before he could knock, as though she'd been watching from the window. Blake, you brought stuff. I did. I thought you might like to really study. Aurora's eyes sparkled when she saw the books. She picked up the dictionary as if it were made of crystal. Can I really keep them? They're yours. Estelle appeared from the tiny kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. She eyed the bags with a cautious expression. You didn't have to, she said, but Blake sensed no anger in her voice, just caution. I wanted to. Aurora told me how much she loves studying. I do. Aurora was already flipping through a science book. Mom, look, it has pictures of the solar system. Blake sat at the small table. Estelle brewed tea without asking if he wanted any. It was a silent ritual forming between them. Blake noticed how Estelle watched his every movement, every word, careful, but not hostile. How's your work search been? Blake asked. Still looking, Estelle answered, setting 3 cups on the table. Had a few interviews. Nothing solid yet. Aurora had already scattered the notebooks around and was testing the colored pencils on a piece of paper. Blake watched the genuine joy in the girl. When was the last time he'd seen anyone so excited about books and pencils? Can I draw, Mum? Yes, sweetie. Blake watched Aurora draw. She started with a yellow circle, the sun. Then a house with square windows, a green tree next to it, simple but surprisingly precise. He felt that familiar ache in his chest. Emma was so far away, but seeing Aurora focused on her drawing soothed something within him, like part of the emptiness he carried was being filled by the presence of this little girl. You draw well, Blake said. Mum taught me. She knows how to draw real people. Really? Estelle shrugged. A bit. It's been a while since I've drawn anything. Why did you stop? I didn't have time, Estelle said, but Blake sensed there was more to the story. Aurora lifted the paper. Done. It's our old house. Blake looked at the drawing. The house had 2 floors, lots of windows, a big porch. A black piano was drawn in the living room through an open window. Was it really like that? Even bigger, Aurora said, but I don't know how to draw bigger houses. Blake picked up a pencil. Can I try to help? Aurora nodded eagerly. Blake drew a few lines extending the house. He wasn't a great artist, but he managed to convey a bigger structure. Like this. More or less, there was also an outdoor stairway to the garden. They spent the next hour drawing together. Aurora described. Blake tried to capture her description in simple lines. Estelle watched them, sipping tea in silence. Blake felt a peace he hadn't experienced in months. It felt good to have a purpose unrelated to spreadsheets or meetings. My daughter likes to draw too, Blake said while Aurora colored a tree. But she draws princesses. She says my cars look like boxes. How old is she again? 5. I wish I had a sister, Aurora said, not looking up from her paper. I'd teach her things. Blake felt a familiar twinge in his chest, but this time it wasn't just pain. It was gratitude. She loves learning too, but she's far away from me, and you remind me of her. Aurora paused and looked at him. Why does she live far away? Because sometimes adults make difficult decisions, and children end up suffering from them. Aurora nodded as if she completely understood. You miss her. I miss her a lot. Aurora put down her pencil and took Blake's hand. Her small hand was warm and stained with blue ink. Does she know you miss her? I think so. Then it's okay. As long as you both know you love each other, distance doesn't matter that much. Blake looked at the 6-year-old who had just given him the wisest advice he'd heard in months. Estelle was also looking at her daughter, with a blend of pride and sadness. How you're very smart, Aurora. Mom taught me. She knows a lot about feelings. The following week, Blake set up a routine. He arrived at 3 in the afternoon when Aurora came back from walking around the airport. He always brought something useful, new books, fruit, study materials. Never anything so lavish that it might make Estelle uncomfortable. Blake discovered that teaching Aurora was a pleasure. She absorbed everything at lightning speed. Multiplication, division, even basic fractions. Within 2 hours, she was solving problems children of 8 usually learn. She's thirsty for knowledge, Blake told Estelle, while Aurora practiced exercises. She's always been this way, right? Since she was little. Always asking questions, always wanting to know why. Like Emma. Estelle smiled. Blake noticed she smiled more now. Curious children are a gift and a challenge. True. Emma asks me things I don't know how to answer. Last week she wanted to know why clouds don't fall. And what did you say? That I'd research and tell her later. Did you research? Blake laughed. I did. It has to do with air density and the weight of water droplets. Aurora would love that explanation. The bond was forming, subtly, respectfully, solidly. Blake didn't invade their space, but he was present. He brought things they needed, not expensive gifts. He asked before giving an opinion. He listened more than he spoke. Estelle was starting to relax around him. She no longer tensed her shoulders when he arrived. Sometimes she even smiled at his silly jokes for Aurora. For Blake, those afternoons had become the best time of the week. Better than any business meeting, better than any professional achievement. Watching Aurora learn was like witnessing a flower bloom. It filled the emptiness left by Emma's absence. Today I'll teach you about the planets, Blake said one Thursday, opening a book with pictures of the solar system. Aurora perked up immediately. I know Earth is the 3rd planet from the Sun. Very good. And how many planets are there? 8. Pluto doesn't count anymore. Blake laughed. You really know it all. Mom told me about Pluto. She said sometimes things change, even if we don't want them to. Estelle looked kindly at her daughter. It's true. Change is part of life. Aurora flipped through the book gently. Which planet is your favorite, Blake? Saturn because of its rings. Mine's Jupiter. It's the biggest of all. Why do you like the biggest? Aurora thought for a moment. Because it protects the smaller planets. The meteors hit Jupiter instead of hitting Earth. Blake looked at Estelle, impressed. Where did she learn that? Documentaries. Back when we had a TV, Aurora watched science shows. I wish I could see Saturn up close, Aurora said. It must be beautiful with all those shiny rings. Maybe someday you'll be an astronaut and see Saturn for real. Aurora's eyes gleamed. You think I could? I think you can be anything you want. Estelle smiled, but Blake saw a shadow pass over her eyes. He understood. How could one dream about space when you weren't sure about your next meal? But at that moment, Blake made a silent decision. Aurora would have every opportunity she deserved. He would make sure of it. The following week, Blake brought books on basic Latin. Aurora was thrilled. Latin! Mom, he brought Latin! Have you studied Latin before? Blake asked, surprised. A little. Mom started teaching me when I was 5. Latin is hard for a 5-year-old. Aurora's always been advanced, Estelle said. She taught herself to read at 3, just from watching me. Aurora was already flipping through the book. Here, Rosa, Rose. I remember this. What does it mean? Rosa, like the flower. In Latin, you change the end of the word depending on how you use it in a sentence. Blake was impressed. Do you remember any more words? Some. Aqua is water. Terra is earth. Stella is star. Aurora paused. And amor is love. Mom said that word sounds similar in almost every language. Why Latin? Blake asked Estelle. Because it's the root of many modern languages. If you understand Latin, it's easier to learn French, Italian, Spanish. Aurora lifted her head from the book. And because it sounds pretty, carpe diem, veni, vidi, vici. The words have music. Blake felt a growing admiration for Estelle. Even with no resources, she gave her daughter an education many wealthy kids didn't have. My old stairs used to sound like a piano, Aurora went on, resuming her drawing. Each step had a different sound. I'd climb them singing scales. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You know music too. I did. Mom taught me piano for 3 years. Blake glanced around the tiny apartment. There wasn't even space for a simple keyboard. Do you miss it? A lot. But Mom sometimes sings for me. She has a pretty voice. Estelle blushed slightly. Aurora exaggerates. I don't exaggerate. Sing that Italian song, Mom, the one about the little bird. Not here, sweetie. Please. Frau Blake. Estelle hesitated, then softly began humming a gentle melody. Aurora was right. Her voice was indeed lovely, clear, on pitch, trained. When she finished, Blake clapped quietly. Where did you learn to sing? Private lessons, when I was a kid. And piano. That too. Blake was starting to get a clearer picture. A family that once had money for private lessons, books in multiple languages, a big house with a piano. Estelle and Aurora weren't just victims of poverty. They were cultured people who had lost everything. In the following weeks, Blake found himself anticipating his afternoons with Aurora. It was as if she filled a part of him that had been empty since the divorce. Her curiosity, her probing questions, the way she soaked up knowledge, all of it reminded him of Emma, but in a way that didn't hurt. Aurora, for her part, flourished under his attention. She asked more complex questions, drew with more confidence, smiled more. Blake also noticed a physical change. Regular meals gave her cheeks a healthier look, her eyes a brighter spark. Estelle watched everything carefully, but Blake sensed she was starting to trust him, not just as someone who helped, but as someone who genuinely cared about Aurora. I was learning Latin and Japanese before, Aurora said one afternoon, practicing her handwriting. It was fun because they're so different. Latin uses our alphabet more, but Japanese has pictures. Do you remember any Japanese words? Arigato means thank you, sayonara means goodbye, and hon means book. Blake shook his head. You're extraordinary, Aurora. Mom taught me. She says knowledge is the only thing nobody can take away. Blake looked at Estelle washing dishes in the tiny sink. He sensed a painful history there, but also tremendous strength. Your mum's right, he said. What you learn stays with you forever. Aurora smiled and went back to writing. Blake watched her, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Simple joy. The sense that he was making a difference in someone's life. When he got up to leave that afternoon, Aurora hugged him tightly. Thank you for the books, Blake, and for teaching me new things. Thank you for teaching me too. I teach you. You do. You teach me that learning can be fun, and that small people can have huge hearts. Aurora laughed and waved from the window as Blake got in his car. Driving back home, Blake realized something. For the first time in months, he didn't feel empty. He still missed Emma, but alongside the missing was something new. Gratitude, joy, the sense that he could be a father in a different way, but still meaningfully. Aurora was filling the void left by Emma's absence. And he was giving Aurora what she deserved. Education, attention, the chance to be the brilliant child she was born to be. The bond between them was forming, quietly, respectfully, but it was real. And Blake had never felt so useful in his entire life. Blake arrived on a Tuesday with a smile on his face. He'd stopped by a French bookstore, and found some children's books in French that he knew Aurora would love. The routine of spending afternoons with her had become the best part of his week. "Blake!" Aurora ran to the door as soon as he knocked. "I finished all the math exercises you gave me. All of them. That was 20 problems." "I know. Mom helped me with 2, but I did the others by myself." Estelle emerged from the kitchen, smiling. Blake noticed she seemed more rested these days, maybe because she no longer worried so much about Aurora during the day. "She woke up early to finish the exercises," Estelle said. "She was excited to show you." Blake felt that familiar warmth in his chest. When was the last time anyone was excited to show him something that wasn't work-related? "I'll check them all," Blake said, taking a seat at the table. "But first, I brought a surprise." Aurora clapped her hands when she saw the French books. "They're stories." "Yes. Le Petit Prince or Madeleine, and some fairy tales." "Can I read them out loud?" "Of course." Aurora opened Le Petit Prince and began reading slowly, pronouncing each word carefully. Her accent was impressive for a child who hadn't had formal lessons in years. Blake watched, amazed. Aurora had a natural gift for languages beyond what he'd imagined. As she read, he noticed some old books stacked in the corner of the table. Worn covers, clearly well used. "Are those your old books?" Blake asked when Aurora paused. "Yeah, the only ones we managed to save when we left the house." Blake picked one up. It was a heavy, yellowed art history book. He flipped through it absently while Aurora resumed reading. "This one seems like a college-level book," he said. "It was Grandpa's," Aurora replied without looking up from the French book. "Mom saved a few of his books." Blake turned the book over to see the spine, European Art History, 18th Century. It looked academic and expensive. He opened the back cover to see if there was any handwriting. That's when he saw it. Written in blue ink in careful script, Aurora St. Clair. Blake felt an odd stirring in his stomach. St. Clair. Why did that name ring a bell? "Aurora," he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "This book has your name on it." "It does." She turned. "Oh, yeah, that's the one Grandpa gave me for my 4th birthday. He wrote my name so I wouldn't forget it was mine." Blake looked again. Aurora St. Clair. The last name stood out on the page, but he couldn't figure out why. "St. Clair is your family's last name?" "Yes, it was Grandpa's last name, and Mom's, before I was born." Blake nodded, but something in him was unsettled. St. Clair. Where had he heard that before? "It's a pretty name," he said, closing the book gently, but his mind kept circling back to that surname. St. Clair, St. Clair. He should know it, but from where? "Blake, are you okay?" Estelle asked. "You look distracted." "I'm fine. It's just, that name sounds familiar. But I can't recall where I heard it." Aurora was reading Le Petit Prince again, but Blake could no longer concentrate fully. The name St. Clair echoed in his head like a song he couldn't place. The rest of the afternoon passed normally. Blake checked Aurora's exercises, perfect and as expected. They read the French books together, with Aurora translating words Blake didn't know. They talked about astronomy, geography, history. But all afternoon, Blake felt as though there was something important he was forgetting. Something about St. Clair that should be obvious, but remained out of reach. "Grandpa had lots of books," Aurora said, leafing through another old volume. "Mom said he read 3 books a week." "What did he do for a living?" Blake asked casually. "He had a company. Mom said he was really smart with business." Blake nodded, but the answer only deepened his unease. A company, St. Clair. Why did it make so much sense, yet no sense? "He died when I was little," Aurora continued, "but Mom always tells stories about him. She says he was a good man, that he treated people well." "He sounds special." "He was. Mom said he always said that business should help people, not hurt them." Blake felt an inexplicable shiver. Business. St. Clair. There was a connection, but he couldn't quite grasp it. When he left the apartment that afternoon, Blake sat in his car for a few minutes before starting the engine. St. Clair. The name kept hammering in his mind. On the drive home, he tried to force his memory. Where had he heard that name? Was it work-related, some old meeting, a document he'd signed? The harder he tried, the more the name slipped away like water through his fingers. At home, Blake went straight to his study and turned on his computer. He typed St. Clair into a search engine, but got hundreds of results. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, nothing that explained why the name felt so personal. He tried St. Clair Business and St. Clair Company. Some results popped up, but they were all recent. Small companies with no clear link to the feeling that he should remember something crucial. By 10 at night, Blake gave up. Maybe it was one of those weird coincidences. Perhaps he'd heard the name in some insignificant context, and his mind was making it into something bigger than it was. But as he tried to sleep, the name still echoed in his head. St. Clair, St. Clair, St. Clair. The next morning, Blake arrived at the office early, but his mind was still divided. During the 9 o'clock meeting, he realized he was distracted, thinking of the St. Clair name instead of focusing on the financial reports. "Blake, yeah, are you listening?" asked Marcus, the VP. "Sorry, my mind was somewhere else." "Something wrong?" "No, nothing important." But as he said it, Blake knew he was lying. There was something important about St. Clair, something he had to recall. During lunch, Blake tried talking about other matters with Jennifer, his secretary. But in the middle of discussing quarterly budgets, he blurted, "Jennifer, have you ever heard of the last name St. Clair?" She furrowed her brow. "St. Clair? Not really." "Why?" "It sounds familiar, but I can't remember why." "Want me to search our files?" Blake hesitated. Part of him wanted to say yes. Another part thought he was overreacting. It was just a name. Aurora was just a girl he was helping. No mystery there. "No, that's okay," he said finally. "Probably just my imagination." Yet even as he said it, Blake knew it wasn't just his imagination. There was something about St. Clair that mattered. Something big. Thomas and Mar seemed that afternoon. When he arrived at Aurora and Estelle's apartment, Blake tried to stay in the moment. Aurora was excited about a new drawing she'd made, a complete solar system with all the planets in proportion. "Look, Blake, I drew Saturn's rings." "Perfect, Aurora. You remembered all the planets. And the moons." "Jupiter has 79 moons." Blake grinned, admiring her talent. But as he praised her drawing, his eyes kept drifting to the old books on the table. Books that once belonged to Aurora's grandfather, a businessman named St. Clair. "Aurora," he said casually, "do you remember your grandpa's full name?" "Yes, Richard St. Clair. Mom always uses his full name when she talks about him. Richard St. Clair." Blake repeated it in his mind. Why did that make his stomach churn? Was he interesting? Mom says he was. He liked teaching people. He always said money was only worthwhile if you used it to help others. Blake nodded, but his unease grew. Richard St. Clair, a businessman. Someone who cared about people. Why did those details make so much noise in his mind? In the following weeks, Blake tried to ignore the strange feeling triggered by the St. Clair name. He focused on enjoying his time with Aurora, watching her thrive with her studies, strengthening the bond he'd built with her and Estelle. But the name wouldn't leave his mind. During work meetings, he'd catch himself thinking of Richard St. Clair. When reviewing contracts, the surname popped into his thoughts. It was as if his subconscious was trying to tell him something that his conscious mind couldn't grasp. One afternoon, while Aurora practiced her handwriting, Blake observed the old books on the table. All were marked from the same private library. All were advanced academic topics: economics, corporate law, business philosophy. "Your grandpa studied a lot," Blake remarked. "He said you never stopped learning," Aurora replied, carefully forming her letters. "Mom says he read late into the night." What did he like reading about most? How to do business the right way. He always said money without honesty wasn't worth anything. Blake felt that now familiar shiver. Honest business, Richard St. Clair. Why did these words affect him so much? "He seems like a good man," Blake said. "He was, until someone really bad did something bad to him." Blake's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Aurora stopped writing and looked at Estelle, who was preparing tea in the kitchen. "Mama, can I tell him?" Estelle hesitated. "Just the basics, sweetheart." Aurora turned back to Blake. "Grandpa had a friend who worked with him, But the friend wasn't really a friend. He made Grandpa lose everything. Blake felt he couldn't breathe. Lose how? Mom said that man lied and stole Grandpa's company. That's why we lost our big house. Blake looked at Estelle, who avoided his gaze. Clearly, she didn't want to go into details. It was a long time ago, Estelle said quickly. Not worth talking about. But Blake could barely speak. Richard St. Clair. So a man of business ethics, betrayed by a partner, lost everything. Why did this story resonate so powerfully? Why did he feel like he already knew it? A seed had been planted when he saw the name in that old book. Now it was growing, turning into something he could no longer ignore. There was something about St. Clair he needed to recall, something important, something that would change everything. But what? Blake didn't know, not yet. But the sense that he was about to discover something terrible wouldn't leave him. The seed was planted, and it had begun to sprout. Blake couldn't sleep that night. The name St. Clair echoed in his mind like an alarm that wouldn't shut off. He got to the office at 7 in the morning, an hour early. The feeling that he was forgetting something crucial wouldn't let him go. Richard St. Clair, a businessman betrayed by a partner. Aurora and Estelle losing everything. Why did this story shake him so deeply? Blake went straight to Jennifer when she arrived at 8. Jennifer, I need you to look for anything related to the name St. Clair in our files. Anything at all. Jennifer noted the urgency in his voice. Okay. Digital or physical archives? Everything, especially old stuff, from about 10 or 15 years ago. All right. Can you give me a better idea of what I'm looking for? Blake hesitated. How could he explain he was searching for something he didn't even know? Anything, any document, contract, correspondence. The name might be St. Clair Holdings. Jennifer wrote it down. I'll start now. Blake tried to focus on morning reports, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time he thought of Aurora talking about her grandpa, that knot in his stomach tightened. At 10:30, Jennifer knocked on his office door. Blake, I found something. He looked up immediately. What? Old documents. Very old. They weren't in the digital system, only in the physical archives in the basement. Blake stood. Show me. They went down to the storage room. Jennifer had set aside 4 thick folders on a makeshift table. St. Clair Holdings, she said, from 2008 to 2010. Looks like your father had dealings with them. Blake felt the world freeze for a second. His father, Andrew Ford. What kind of dealings? From the paperwork, they looked like partnerships in various projects, investments, acquisitions. Blake picked up the first folder, his hands trembling slightly. He opened it and began reading the initial documents. Partnership contracts between Ford Enterprises and St. Clair Holdings, signed by Andrew Ford and Richard St. Clair. Richard St. Clair, Aurora's grandfather. Blake felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. He kept reading, already sensing the horror that would follow. The earliest documents showed a prosperous collaboration. Andrew Ford and Richard St. Clair working together on various acquisitions, buying struggling companies, restructuring, selling for profit. Blake skimmed quickly, searching for something that explained what went wrong. He found it. An internal memo dated February 2009. Andrew Ford expressing frustration with St. Clair's excessive concern for the well-being of employees at acquired companies. Business is about profit, not social welfare, was written in Andrew Ford's own handwriting. Blake read on, more memos, more frustration. Richard St. Clair consistently opposing Andrew Ford's more aggressive methods, trying to protect jobs, insisting on fair severance, refusing to cut worker benefits. Blake saw a handwritten note in the margin of one contract. St. Clair is becoming an obstacle. His father's handwriting. Blake flipped pages faster, heart pounding. The story was becoming clearer. 2 men with completely opposing views of business. One who saw people as numbers on a spreadsheet. Another who believed business should serve people, not the other way around. Then Blake found the document that changed everything. A hidden clause in one of the partnership contracts. A clause allowing either partner to dissolve the partnership in case of irreconcilable operational incompatibility. Blake read the clause 3 times. It was written in dense legal language, buried in pages of technical text. Richard St. Clair probably hadn't noticed when he signed, but Andrew Ford had. The next document was a legal notice dated August 2009. Andrew Ford was dissolving the partnership and assuming total control of all shared assets, all legal, all within the contract's terms, completely immoral. Blake kept reading with a sick feeling in his stomach. Over the following months, Andrew Ford systematically blocked all of Richard St. Clair's attempts to recover. Lawsuits for unfair competition, legal threats. Pressure on shared clients, investigations, letters from lawyers, veiled threats of legal retaliation. Finally, the last document in the folder, a death certificate. Richard St. Clair died in March 2011. Heart attack. Age 52. Blake closed the folder and put his head in his hands. Richard St. Clair, Aurora's grandfather, the man who gave her books as gifts, the man who believed in helping people through business, the man Blake's father had deliberately destroyed. Blake picked up another folder and found more documents, reports from private investigators Andrew Ford had hired to monitor the commercial activities of ex-partners. Monitor, a polite word for espionage. Blake read report after report. His father had made sure Richard St. Clair never recovered. Every time St. Clair tried to start something new, Andrew Ford found a way to sabotage it. It wasn't enough to have taken the man's company. Andrew Ford wanted to utterly destroy him, and he had succeeded. The last documents detailed the St. Clair family's financial situation after Richard's death. The widow struggling with debts. The young daughter, Estelle, growing up under increasingly precarious conditions. And years later, Aurora was born into a family that had lost everything because of Andrew Ford. Because of the Ford name. Because of him. Blake stood up slowly. He walked to the tiny window in the records room and stared at the parking lot below. Expensive cars, corporate buildings, the business world in which his father had built an empire. My name built empires, Blake murmured to himself, by destroying families. Everything made sense now. The big house Aurora described, the piano, the library with books in many languages, the sophisticated education Estelle had given her daughter, even in poverty. They weren't just random victims of hard times. They were specific victims, victims of Andrew Ford's greed and cruelty. Blake thought of Aurora in the airport, barefoot, begging for food in 7 languages. He thought of Estelle, too proud to accept charity, struggling to find work. He thought of the brutal irony that he had become friends with the family his own name had destroyed. Blake returned to the table and gathered all the documents into the folders. He would take them home. He would read every detail. He would understand the full extent of what his father had done, and then he would decide what to do next. Ursuma Carvereth that night, Blake stayed up until 3 in the morning rereading every page. Each new document painted a clearer picture of Andrew Ford's systematic destruction. It wasn't just a business deal gone wrong. It wasn't a simple disagreement. It was a cold, calculated act of betrayal. Richard St. Clair had trusted Andrew Ford. He'd shared confidential information, signed contracts without suspecting betrayal, believed they were building something together. And Andrew Ford used that trust as a weapon. Blake closed the last folder and sank into his home office chair. He knew exactly what he had to do. Not out of guilt. Guilt was an emotional luxury that wouldn't help Aurora or Estelle. But out of dignity, out of justice, out of everything that was right in the world. He would tell them the truth. He would look Aurora in the eyes and explain that the man she saw as a friend was the son of the man who destroyed her family. He would tell Estelle that the last name he carried was the very one that had taken everything from her. And then he would try to fix what could still be fixed. He couldn't bring back Richard St. Clair. He couldn't undo 15 years of hardship and poverty, but he could give Aurora and Estelle what they'd always deserved, what had been stolen from them. Blake picked up his phone and called Jennifer, despite the late hour. "Jennifer, I know it's really late, but I need you to schedule a meeting with our attorneys for tomorrow morning. And I want all the company's financial documents for the last 5 years on my desk at 8. Is everything okay, Blake?" "No," he said, But it will be. I'll make sure of it." When he hung up, Blake felt both heavier and lighter at once. The weight of the truth he had to tell, the relief of finally knowing his purpose. Aurora St. Clair, the girl who taught him that learning could be fun, the girl whose family had been ruined by the man he called father. Blake would do the right thing, even if it meant losing the two people who made him happiest, even if it cost him everything. Blake stood outside the red brick building for 15 minutes before climbing the stairs. He had rehearsed what to say hundreds of times the night before, but now that he was there, every word felt insufficient. How do you tell a 6-year-old that the man she considers a friend is the son of the man who destroyed her family? How do you face a woman who has learned to trust you and admit you carry the name that ruined her life? Blake took a deep breath and climbed the 2 flights of stairs. Each step felt heavier with the weight of the documents he'd read. He stopped in front of apartment B. He could hear voices inside. Aurora laughing at something Estelle said. The sound of her laughter made his heart ache. In a few minutes, that laughter would be gone. Blake knocked on the door with the familiar pattern, 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 slow ones. "Blake!" Aurora's excited voice came from inside. Small footsteps ran to the door. The door opened, and Aurora greeted him with a giant smile. She was wearing a t-shirt he had brought the week before, light blue with a drawing of the solar system. "You're early today. I was just finishing a drawing for you. It's a castle with a giant library." Blake looked at her beaming face and felt as if someone was crushing his heart. "Aurora," he said softly, "can we talk? You and your mum?" Aurora noticed something off in his tone. Her smile faded slightly. "Is everything okay? You look sad. Can we sit down?" Estelle appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. Blake could see she'd been cooking. The apartment smelled of soup. "Blake, are you all right? You look pale." Blake stepped inside the tiny apartment. He glanced around, the table where they had studied, the books he'd brought, Aurora's drawings on the wall, a place that had become special to him, a place that would soon be filled with pain. "I need to tell you both something," Blake said, sitting on the sofa. "Something I found out yesterday." Aurora sat next to him, still with that total trust children have in adults they love. She took his hand like she always did. Estelle remained standing, but Blake could see she was tense. Blake looked at Aurora, then at Estelle. "Where to begin?" "My full name is Blake Elias Ford," he said slowly. Aurora smiled. "Ford? Like the cars?" "Like the Ford Corporation," Blake corrected. "My family has a big company." Estelle frowned. Blake could see something clicking into place in her mind. The Ford name, his sudden appearance in their lives, the obvious wealth. "Blake," Estelle said carefully, "why are you telling us this?" Blake took a deep breath. "Because I found out my father." He paused. The words felt like shards of glass in his throat. "Andrew Ford, what about your father?" Estelle asked. But Blake could see in her eyes that she already knew. "He was the partner who betrayed your father, Estelle. Andrew Ford is the one who destroyed Richard St. Clair." The silence that followed was deafening. Aurora looked from Blake to her mother, not fully understanding but sensing the weight of his words. Estelle stood completely still for a long moment. Her face cycled through confusion, realization, shock, and finally, total disbelief. "Ford," she whispered. "Andrew Ford." The name came from her lips like a curse. "I didn't know," Blake said quickly. "I swear I didn't know. I only found out yesterday when I saw your names in the old company files, when I saw the documents of what he did." Estelle stared at him with an expression Blake had never seen before. Not just anger, but something deeper, pain, betrayal, and complete horror. "You didn't know," she repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "No. I had never even heard of Richard St. Clair until yesterday. My father never told me about how he destroyed my family." Estelle stood abruptly. "How he stole everything we had. How he killed my father." Aurora shrank on the sofa. "Mom, why are you yelling?" Blake gripped Aurora's hand more tightly. "He didn't physically kill him," he said carefully. "But I understand what you mean. I read the documents. I saw what he did. You understand?" Estelle let out a harsh laugh. You understand what it's like to watch my father die of heartbreak? To see a good, honest man destroyed by someone he thought was a friend? Blake stayed silent. There was nothing he could say. Your father didn't just take our company, Estelle continued, voice rising. He made sure we could never recover. Every time my father tried to start over, there was Andrew Ford to destroy him again. Aurora looked from her mom to Blake, tears welling up in her eyes, unsure why everyone was so upset. Blake, Aurora said in a small voice, why is Mom so angry? Blake looked at her, feeling like his heart was being torn out. Because sometimes we find out things that make us sad. Estelle, Blake tried, I want to fix this. I want to do what I can to fix it. Estelle let out a bitter laugh. How do you fix 15 years of poverty? How do you fix my father being dead? How do you fix my daughter having to beg for food in airports because the father of someone she thought was a friend destroyed us? Every word felt like a knife. Blake knew he deserved all of it. I know I can't undo what happened, but I can at least try to give you back what was taken. Give us what? Estelle cut him off. Money to ease your guilt. You think that will fix anything? It's not about guilt, Blake said. It's about justice. It's about doing the right thing. The right thing, Estelle was trembling. The right thing would have been your father never destroying my family. The right thing would have been Aurora growing up in a house with books and a piano instead of begging for crumbs. Aurora began to cry quietly. Why are you fighting? Estelle looked at her daughter, her expression softening for a moment. But when she turned back to Blake, the hardness returned. Blake stood slowly. My name is Blake Elias Ford, he said, as if introducing himself for the first time. I found out my father ruined your family. I didn't know, but now I do. And what do you want me to do with that information? Estelle asked. Forgive you. Pretend it doesn't matter. I want to try to fix what can be fixed. We don't need you, Estelle said firmly. Your last name literally took the roof from over my daughter's head. We don't need your charity now. Blake glanced at Aurora, curled up on the sofa, tears running down her cheeks. Aurora? No, Estelle stepped between them. You don't talk to her. You have no right to talk to her. Not anymore. Estelle, please, she has nothing to do with... She has everything to do with it, Estelle exploded. She's the victim of all this. She's the one who lost her home, her education, her normal childhood. Blake felt tears in his own eyes. I know, it kills me to know, but I truly care about her. About both of you. You care? Estelle took a step toward him. If you cared, you would have found out who we were before coming into our lives. If you cared, you wouldn't have let my daughter get attached to you. I didn't know. It doesn't matter if you knew, Estelle yelled. What matters is that you're a Ford. What matters is that the blood in your veins is the same blood as the man who destroyed my family. Aurora was crying louder now, scared by the shouting. Mom, stop, please. Estelle took a deep breath, trying to calm herself for her daughter's sake. Leave, she said to Blake, walking to the door. Leave our home. Leave our lives. Blake glanced one last time at Aurora. The little girl who had taught him that words were doors. The little girl who had filled the void Emma's absence created. The little girl now looking at him with confusion and hurt. Aurora, he said softly. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Get out, Estelle shouted, throwing open the door. Blake walked slowly to the door. He paused at the threshold and turned back. Estelle, I understand your anger. I understand you may never forgive me, but Aurora isn't to blame for any of this. She deserves everything good the world can offer. She deserves not to have you in her life, Estelle said. She deserves not to carry the weight of being friends with the son of the man who destroyed her family. Blake nodded. I understand. He walked out. Estelle slammed the door behind him. Blake stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to Aurora's muffled sobs on the other side. He descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the empty building. When he reached his car, he sat in the driver's seat for a long time before he could start the engine. He had done the right thing by telling the truth. He knew that. But doing the right thing had never hurt so much. No. In the days that followed, Aurora asked questions Estelle didn't know how to answer. Mom, Why did Blake leave without saying a proper goodbye? Estelle was washing dishes in the tiny sink, looking for a way to explain adult betrayal to a 6-year-old. Sometimes people have to leave us, sweetheart. But he said he was going to teach me about the stars today. He brought that astronomy book and promised we'd study constellations. Estelle closed her eyes. The book still lay on the table, right where Blake had left it, alongside the other books he'd brought, small reminders of how Aurora had blossomed under his attention. He's not coming back, Aurora. Why not? Did I do something wrong? Estelle's heart broke. No, honey, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't. Never. Then why doesn't he want to be my friend anymore? How to explain, how to say that the man she adored carried the last name that ruined their lives? Because sometimes things get complicated between adults. Aurora was silent for a while. Was it because of that conversation you had, when you got mad? We weren't mad, sweetie. We just found out it was best if he didn't come. But I liked him. He listened when I talked about things I learned. He was always so happy when I solved math problems. Aurora's simple words stabbed Estelle's heart. She, too, had started to like Blake. She had started to trust him. She had begun to believe there might be genuinely good people in the world. And then she discovered he was a fraud. Estelle braced herself on the sink, fighting the rage still burning inside her. Mum, are you crying? Estelle wiped her eyes quickly. No, honey, it's just the steam from the hot water. But Aurora wasn't dumb. She knew when adults were sad. Is Blake coming back tomorrow? No, Aurora, he isn't. Ever again. Estelle turned to look at her daughter. Aurora sat at the table, legs swinging, eyes still red from crying. Never again. Aurora nodded slowly. Can I keep the books he brought? Estelle glanced at the stack of books on the table. Evidence of Blake's presence in their lives. Evidence of how she'd been fooled. But Aurora loved those books. You can keep the books. Can I finish the math exercises he gave me? Yes, Aurora resumed, swinging her legs. Mom. Yes. Why do grown-ups do things that hurt kids? The question hit Estelle like a punch. Aurora didn't fully understand, but she knew she'd been hurt by adult decisions. I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices. Did Blake make a bad choice? Estelle hesitated. Blake had lied by omission about who he was, but he also genuinely cared about Aurora. He was the first person in years to make Aurora smile every day. It's complicated, Estelle finally said. In the following days, Estelle noticed Aurora becoming quieter. She still did her math exercises, still read her French books, but there was a sadness in her that wasn't there before. Mum, Aurora said one afternoon, do you think Blake misses me? Estelle felt her heart tighten. Why do you ask? Because I miss him, and he said I reminded him of his daughter, so maybe he misses me too. Estelle didn't know how to respond. In truth, she believed so. She believed Blake did miss Aurora. She believed he had genuinely cared for her, which made it all even more painful. Blake Ford had arrived in their lives like a savior, giving Aurora hope, giving her the education she deserved, making her smile again. And all the while he carried the last name that had destroyed everything they once had. Estelle was consumed by anger. Anger for being deceived. Anger for letting Aurora get attached. Anger for starting to believe that maybe things could get better. Anger because she still felt, deep down, that she missed him too. But mostly, she was angry because Aurora was suffering. And Aurora had already suffered enough because of the Fords. She had suffered more than enough for a lifetime. Blake drove for 2 hours to the mansion where he'd grown up, in the wealthiest part of the city, 10 acres with wrought iron gates and manicured gardens. The house where he learned that money was more important than people. A house that now made him sick just to look at. Andrew Ford, now 68, still kept a strict routine. Blake knew he'd find him in his private study at 9 in the morning, going over financial reports while sipping black coffee brought by the maid on schedule. Blake parked in the circular stone driveway. He looked at the imposing facade of the house, marble columns, huge windows, architecture meant to impress and intimidate. How many families had been destroyed to pay for all that? The maid greeted him at the door. "Good morning, Mr. Blake. Your father is in his study." Blake nodded and walked through the familiar corridors. Expensive paintings on the walls, Persian rugs on the floors, antique furniture worth more than most people earned in a year, all built on the ruins of people like Richard St. Clair. Blake knocked on the study door. "Come in." Andrew Ford was seated behind a massive mahogany desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, a stack of documents in front of him. At 68, he was still an imposing figure, grey hair perfectly groomed, an expensive suit even at home, a posture that commanded equal parts respect and fear. "Blake, what a surprise." Andrew didn't look up from his papers. "I thought you only came by at Christmas. We need to talk." "About what?" Andrew finally glanced at his son. "If it's about the company, you know you can schedule a meeting." Blake sat in the chair opposite the desk, the same chair he'd sat in as a child, listening to lectures on responsibility and success. "It's about St. Clair Holdings." Andrew paused. He removed his glasses slowly and stared at Blake. "St. Clair Holdings," he repeated. "I haven't heard that name in a long time. Richard St. Clair. Ah." Andrew leaned back in his chair. "So you've been digging through the old files." "I have, and I discovered what you did." Andrew shrugged. "I did business, like I always do." "You destroyed a man. You destroyed an entire family." "I dissolved a partnership that wasn't working," Andrew replied coldly. "All within legal bounds." "Legal doesn't mean right." Andrew laughed, a humorless sound. "Right? Blake, you're 42. It's time you understood how the world works. So explain. Why did you destroy St. Clair?" Andrew got up and walked to the window overlooking the gardens. He kept his back to Blake, hands clasped behind him. "Richard St. Clair was a dreamer," he said finally. "He thought business was about helping people, about doing the right thing." Andrew turned to face Blake. He didn't have the stomach to do what was necessary. Necessary for what? To win, to build something big, to leave a legacy. Blake stood as well. "You call this a legacy?" "Destroying families. I call it reality." Andrew went back to his desk. "St. Clair Holdings was small when we started, a mediocre financial consulting firm. I turned it into an empire. By stealing from Richard St. Clair. By using our resources in the most efficient way." Andrew sat again. "Richard had no vision, no ambition. He was satisfied with crumbs." Blake clenched his fists. "He trusted you. He was naive. Trust is a weakness in business. You were friends. We were partners. There's a difference." Blake looked at the man who raised him, who taught him to ride a bike, paid for his education, gave him every material advantage money could buy. The same man who had deliberately ruined a family for greed. "Why?" Blake asked. "Why wasn't sharing the profits enough? Why take everything?" Andrew sighed, as if explaining something obvious to a stubborn child. "Because I could. Because it was business." The brutal simplicity of the answer was like a slap in the face. "You ruined lives. And built empires. That's what matters." Blake felt sick. "How do you sleep at night? How do you live with yourself, knowing you destroyed people?" "I sleep very well in my Italian silk sheets, in a house paid for by the profits of my ventures." Andrew picked up a pen and resumed writing. "Richard St. Clair was weak. The business world has no place for the weak." "He died, father." "He died of heartbreak." Andrew paused for a moment, then continued writing. "People die every day for all kinds of reasons. You killed him." "I beat him." Andrew glanced up. "There's a difference." Blake stood there in silence, watching the man before him, searching for any trace of humanity, any sign of regret. There was none. "He had a young daughter," Blake said. "A granddaughter. They lost everything. I'm not responsible for the families of losers." Blake stepped closer to the desk. "His granddaughter is six. 6, Dad. She went hungry because of what you did." Andrew finally stopped writing and looked at Blake. "And what does that have to do with me, or with you?" Blake took a deep breath. "I met them, Aurora and Estelle St. Clair." Andrew frowned. "How?" "By chance, at the airport. Aurora was asking for food." "And?" Blake felt a mix of anger and sorrow, and I cared about them. I genuinely cared. Aurora is extraordinary, intelligent, curious, full of potential, and she's living in poverty because of what you did to her grandfather. Andrew leaned back in his chair. Ah, now I see. You feel guilty. I feel responsible. No difference. Andrew folded his hands on the desk. Blake, you can't save the world. You can't fix every injustice. I can try to fix this one. Why? Why care about two people you barely know? Blake thought of Aurora reading in French, Estelle singing for her daughter, how they made him feel useful for the first time in years. Because they deserve it. Because it's the right thing to do. Andrew chuckled again. The right thing. You sound exactly like Richard St. Clair, always talking about doing the right thing. And look where it got him. Exactly. Look where it got him. Andrew stood. Blake, you're my son. My blood runs through your veins. Don't waste it on sentimentality. Blake stared at his father for a long moment, then turned toward the door. Blake, Andrew called. You can't change what happened. You can't bring Richard St. Clair back. You can't undo 15 years of consequences. Blake paused in the doorway, not turning around. But I can try to do what's right from now on. And what's right, in your opinion? Blake turned to face him. Giving them back what was stolen. Giving Aurora the education she deserves. Giving Estelle the dignity you took from her. Andrew shook his head. You're making a mistake. You're getting emotional. Business isn't about emotions. Maybe that's why you never understood Richard St. Clair. He knew business was about people. You only see numbers. And that's why I won, and he lost. Blake glanced around one last time at the luxurious office, at the man who taught him that success was measured only in dollars. You didn't win, Dad. You just destroyed. He left the office and walked through the mansion's corridors. Each step felt like leaving not just the house, but an entire worldview behind. When he reached his car, he sat for a moment before starting the engine. He thought of Emma, his 5-year-old daughter. He thought of the kind of man he wanted to be for her. He thought of Aurora, who had shown him that fatherhood wasn't just about blood. It was about caring, about being present, about making sacrifices for others. Blake started the car and drove away from the property. In the rearview mirror, the mansion shrank behind him. I'm a father, he said aloud to himself. And I'm not you. For the first time in weeks, Blake knew exactly what he needed to do, even if it meant facing Estelle's rejection again. Even if Aurora never wanted to see him again, he would do the right thing, because that's what real fathers do. A week had passed since Blake left the apartment, and Aurora hadn't stopped asking about him. Estelle tried to distract her with the books he left, math exercises, drawing, but nothing fully worked. Every morning, Aurora woke up asking if Blake was coming that day. Every afternoon, she sat at the window, hoping to see him coming up the stairs. Every night, she wanted to know if he would be there the next day. Mom, Aurora said for the 10th time that day, looking out the small window. Why doesn't he come back? Estelle was washing dishes again, trying to find the strength for the same conversation. The past weeks had been exhausting. Work, caring for Aurora, managing her own conflicted feelings about Blake. We've been through this, honey. But I don't understand. Aurora walked away from the window and sat on the table, legs swinging. He always came back, every day. He promised we would study constellations. Estelle dried her hands on a towel and turned to face her daughter. Aurora looked thinner. She was eating less since Blake left, sleeping poorly, smiling less. It was as if a light inside her had gradually gone out. Sometimes people can't come back, Aurora. Why? Is he sick? Did he move away? Estelle gazed at her daughter. Aurora deserved a real explanation. She deserved to understand, even if it hurt. Estelle took a deep breath and sat in the chair next to Aurora. Remember the stories I tell you about Grandpa? How he had a big company and lost everything? Aurora nodded. Grandpa was good and worked hard, but a bad man took everything from him. That's right. Well, Estelle hesitated. Blake's father was that bad man. He's the one who took everything from Grandpa. Aurora frowned, processing slowly. Blake's father was the bad man. Yes. Aurora was silent for a long moment. Estelle saw the wheels turning in her mind. So that's why we lost the big house. Why we don't have a piano anymore. That's why. And that's why Grandpa got sad and died. Estelle felt her heart clench. Yes, sweetheart. Aurora lowered her eyes, fiddling with her fingers. She stayed quiet so long that Estelle wondered if she'd accepted it. But then Aurora looked up and said, with conviction that startled her mother, "But he's different, Mom." "Aurora." "He's different from his dad," Aurora said, with absolute certainty. "Bad people don't do the things he did." "Honey, I know you liked him, but he listened to me when I talked about things I learned," Aurora interrupted. "He laughed at my jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. He was really happy when I solved difficult math problems." Estelle couldn't find words against her daughter's logic. "And he talked about his daughter the same way he talked about me," Aurora continued, "with love, with sadness. He got sad when he said she lived far away. Bad people don't get sad about missing their children. Aurora, I know him, Mom." Aurora looked into her mother's eyes. "I know what he's like inside. When he taught me things, his eyes lit up. When I told him stories, he listened for real. He's not evil like his father." Estelle felt the weight of the truth spoken by a child, a truth she'd been trying to deny all week. Blake was different. Estelle had sensed it when he first arrived in their lives. The respectful way he treated them, the genuine delight he showed when Aurora learned something new, the thoughtful way he chose which books to bring. None of that had been fake. None of that changed when he found out who they were. "Mum," Aurora said softly, taking Estelle's hand, "do you miss him too?" Estelle looked at her daughter, those big, honest eyes that always saw right through her. She couldn't lie. "I do. A lot. A lot." Aurora nodded like this confirmed something she already knew. "So why can't we call him? Why can't we say we want him to come back?" "Because it's complicated, Aurora. There's history between our families. But we're not the old families," Aurora said, with the simple logic of a child. "We're us. He's him. Grandpa's already gone. Blake's father is a different person from him." The silence in the apartment felt stronger than any argument. Estelle looked around. The books Blake had brought still on the table. The math exercises Aurora worked on every day. The solar system drawing on the wall. Evidence of how their lives had improved with his presence. Evidence of how Aurora had thrived under his care. "You know what I think?" Aurora asked. "What?" "I think Blake is sad too. I think he misses us." Estelle considered that. Blake had looked genuinely devastated when he left. "Mom," Aurora said, "will you call him, just to see if he's okay?" Estelle studied her daughter's hopeful eyes, the face that had lost some of its joy over the past weeks. "You really want me to call?" Aurora nodded eagerly. "Yes. And I think you do, too." Estelle smiled for the first time in days. "You know me well. I do. And I know Blake, too. He's good, Mom." "All right," Estelle said. "I'll call." Aurora jumped off the table and hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Mom." Blake was in his office when the phone rang. Jennifer was out to lunch, so he answered it himself. "Ford Enterprises." "Blake." The voice was hesitant and familiar. Blake nearly dropped the phone. "Estelle?" "Yes, it's me." Blake sank into his chair, heart pounding. "Is everything okay? Is Aurora okay? She's asking about you. Every day. Several times a day." Blake closed his eyes. "How is she?" "Sad. She doesn't understand why you won't come back. She sits at the window waiting, and I don't know how to explain it to her." Estelle's voice quivered with emotion. "And Aurora made me realize a few things. She says you're different from your father. She says she knows who you are inside." Her tone softened. "I think she's right." Blake felt tears in his eyes. "Can I see you both? Can I explain what I want to do? Aurora will be very happy." "And you?" Estelle hesitated. "Me too." "Can I come this afternoon?" "You can come right now if you want. I'll be there." Blake knocked on the door with the familiar pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 slow taps. The door opened and Estelle appeared. She looked tired, but the anger in her eyes was gone. "Blake!" Aurora came running from behind her mother, throwing herself into his arms. Blake hugged her tight, feeling as though a missing piece had slotted back into place. "Hi, Aurora, I missed you. I knew you'd come back. Why did you take so long?" "I finished all my math exercises and read my French books twice already." Blake laughed, still holding her. "You're amazing." They went inside. Blake sat on the sofa, Aurora immediately snuggling up next to him. "Estelle," Blake began, "before anything else, I need to tell you about a conversation I had." Estelle pulled out a chair at the table, listening intently. "I visited my father, and he feels no remorse, none. To him, destroying Richard St. Clair was just another business move." Blake looked straight at Estelle. "But I'm not my father." "I know," Estelle said softly. Blake blinked in surprise. "You do?" "Aurora made me see that. Sometimes children see people more clearly than we do." Aurora grinned. "I told Mom you were good." Blake felt his heart warm. "Estelle, I want to do the right thing. I want to fix what my father tore apart." "How?" Blake took a deep breath. "I want to enroll Aurora in the best private school in the city. I want her to have real piano lessons, language lessons, anything she wants to learn." Estelle opened her mouth to protest, but Blake continued. "And I want to give you a share of my portion of the company. You deserve what was taken from you." "Blake, I don't know if I can accept—" "It's not charity," Blake said firmly. "It's restitution. Returning what never should have been taken." Aurora looked from her mom to Blake. "Does that mean you'll come see us again?" Blake looked at Estelle. "If your mom allows it?" Estelle hesitated a long moment. Blake could see the internal battle in her eyes. "You'll have to prove you're different from your father," she said finally. "How?" "By being present. By always telling the truth. By treating Aurora the way she deserves." Blake nodded. "I can do that." Estelle glanced at Aurora, whose eyes were bright with hope. "Okay," she said. "But this time, no secrets, no surprises." "No secrets," Blake agreed. Aurora jumped up and down on the couch. "So you'll come back tomorrow?" Blake laughed. "If you both want me to, I'll come every day." "I do." Estelle smiled as well, for the first time since learning who he was. "Then it's decided," she said. 3 months later, Blake was sitting at the same small table in the apartment, helping Aurora with basic algebra. She had started at the private school and was advancing quickly. "Done?" Aurora showed him her notebook. "I finished them all." Blake checked her answers. "Perfect, as always." Aurora beamed and ran off to show Estelle, who was in the kitchen making dinner. Blake watched the scene. Estelle was now working as a consultant on a new project at his company, not out of charity, but because she truly had a talent for financial analysis. Aurora studied happily, piano lessons twice a week, French on Thursdays. But more important than all that was how they'd become a non-traditional family. Blake visited every day. He took Aurora to school when Estelle was working. He helped with her homework. He attended her little piano recitals. He was present with affection and respect. "Blake," Estelle called from the kitchen, "can you come here for a minute?" Blake joined her. Estelle was stirring a pot of soup, but paused when he approached. "I want to tell you something," she said. "What is it?" She turned to face him. "I was wrong about you. At first, when I found out who you were, I thought your last name defined you." Blake stayed quiet, listening. "But a last name doesn't say who we are. You're nothing like your father. Completely different." She paused. "And I'm thankful you showed up. We're better off with you. I'm better off with you too. My daughter really cares for you. And I care too." Blake smiled. "You both changed my life. You taught me what it means to be a real father." Aurora came running in from the living room. "Blake, look." She held up a new book. "My teacher gave me this advanced astronomy book. It has pictures from the Hubble telescope." Blake crouched down to her level. "Let's check them out." They sat at the table, Aurora opening the book carefully. Estelle watched from the kitchen, smiling. The past hadn't changed. Richard St. Clair was still gone. Andrew Ford was still the man who destroyed a family for greed. But the story had been rewritten with justice, with presence, with love. Blake couldn't undo what his father had done, but he could build something new and better. Aurora pointed to a photo of a colorful nebula. Look how pretty. It looks like a giant butterfly in space. Blake looked at the girl who had taught him that family wasn't just about blood. That fatherhood was about choosing to show up, day after day. It's really beautiful, he said. Should we read about it? Aurora nodded eagerly and started reading aloud. Estelle kept cooking, listening to her daughter's voice mingling with Blake's gentle comments. For the first time in 15 years, their home was filled with a sense of future rather than the past. And Estelle knew that was what Richard St. Clair would have wanted for his granddaughter. Not revenge, not endless anger, but a happy child, well-educated and loved. A child who'd have all the opportunities she deserved. A child who would grow up knowing that despite life's cruelties, good people could still choose to do the right thing. Aurora finished reading about the nebula and looked at Blake with those curious eyes he had grown to love. Can I be an astronomer when I grow up? You can be anything you want, Blake answered. Absolutely anything. And for the first time, those words weren't just a kind wish. They were a promise he had the power to keep. Aurora smiled and returned to the book. Blake glanced at Estelle, who was watching them with happy tears in her eyes. The story had been rewritten. And this time, everyone won. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.